Welcome to the Mom and podcast. We're your hosts, Suzanne Kearns
and Missy Stevens. We want to help you through everything that happens in the ellipses, from your professional life to your emotional health.
You're a mom and so much more. Let's figure out what comes next together. Welcome to the Mom and podcast. I'm Suzanne Kearns, a mom and writer, LGBTQ and sex ed advocate. And today, 30% dry shampoo.
That's a pretty good percentage.
It's getting bad.
You still have at least 30% to go before you're in some sort of dire situation.
Yes.
I'm Missy Stevens, mom and writer, foster care advocate, and today a spring planting planner. I think we're done with freezes and I can start planning.
Don't you
new pots
knock
and stuff.
On wood. And today we are so excited to welcome Amber Leventry. Amber is a parent and queer, non-binary writer and advocate. They live in Vermont and have 3 kids. Amber is an editor of Trends and News at Parents Magazine, and their writing appears in many publications, including Scary Mommy, Romper, Long Reads, The Temper, The Washington Post, and Parents Magazine. Amber uses their words to influence and educate people on the importance of supporting the LGBTQIA+ community. They provide LGBTQIA+ inclusivity trainings locally and nationally. They are also available to give keynote speeches at conferences and events. Welcome. We are so happy to have you here.
Wow. That makes me sound really knowledgeable and stuff. So.
I know.
Don't you love having your bio read? I love it.
I'm like, I wrote that.
I want to hire them. They sound amazing.
Well, awesome. And beyond those amazing bio facts that we just got to read about you, we were wondering if you can tell everyone a little bit about your career path and any major life events that might have impacted. I almost said infected. Infected your decisions.
Same.
I mean,
what's the difference? Might have impacted your decisions, like maybe becoming a parent.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, I'm a parent and writer and advocate and all the thing, and they definitely came together. Kind of one can't happen without the other. My oldest is now 11. And, my ex and I knew we wanted kids. We moved to Vermont in 2001, and Vermont was the first state that allowed civil unions. And we're like, that felt like a really safe place to go out of college. We met at Penn State. And so we were coming from Pennsylvania to Vermont, and we knew we wanted to have a family. And we had the, benefit of, to some extent, choosing when we wanted to happen. And then obviously there's then the not so fun benefits of, okay, it's going to be really expensive. Where do we get the sperm? And, all the legal paperwork that went behind it, because that was even before federally same-sex relationships were recognized. So before we even had conceived a child, we went through all the paperwork to make sure this kiddo was legally recognized as my child in some capacity, because I couldn't adopt something that didn't exist yet. I was the non-biological carrier of all 3 of my kiddos. And we didn't do any egg transfer or anything. So my kids are my kids, but I don't have any biological connection to them. And so depending on where I live, it shouldn't have to, but depending on where we are, whether it's living or traveling, visiting friends or family, especially, international travel, not that we did a ton, but just taking a Caribbean cruise or something that, if we wanted to go on a Disney cruise or a certain island, we have to think about those things. And so going through the whole process of just trying to build our family, and I knew I wanted to write. I have a degree in horticulture and ag business. And it wasn't until my last semester finishing up this research paper that I'm like, oh, I want to write forever and ever. And I really thought I would be writing about sustainable agriculture. And I really thought I would have my hands in that. And then I had to go back to school to do that. And I'm like, I don't think I want a master's in agriculture that bad. So I'm like, I'm just going to write on the side. It's fun. It's therapeutic.
Yes.
But then the parenting piece kicked in, and trying to find information about being a queer parent. And at the time identifying as gender fluid. I mean, I never really identified with the word lesbian, but I was, presenting as female and using she, her pronouns. there just wasn't a lot out there. So I started writing our story about trying to become parents and becoming a parent. And I wrote for this little website called Cherry Girl, and it was a lesbian magazine about parenting. And for so long, and to some extent that still exists in the space, queer spaces don't talk about parenting a lot. It's either parenting and they don't have a lot of queer parents, or queer, and there's this weird thing. So I'm like, I need the two to mesh. And so my writing became that. And actually I picked up a lot of traction on what are considered, especially then 12 years ago, mainstream parenting sites, because I had the same stories to tell. I was scooping poop out of the bathroom. I was doing all the things. I was exhausted, but yet there are these extra layers of worry and fear and discrimination. And so I started using my writing to not only tell our story, to have other people feel seen, but for other people to understand, like, oh man, you have to like make lunches and deal with second parent adoption? Yeah, I do. And so then my twins were born, and one of my kiddos is transgender, and I have her consent to talk about her today. As you mentioned, I am an educator, and I use her and our story a little bit in my education, and my advocacy really kicked off. I started writing a little bit about not just her experience, because it's her experience in her life, but mine as a parent of a transgender child, to educate others and to tell our story in a way that would help others. And I was getting a lot of personal messages from people saying, oh my gosh, me too. Where can I go for help? How can you, this article really helped me? And people were asking for advice. And I don't speak for all trans and non-binary people. I don't speak for all parents of trans people, but I realized I had something to offer to other parents. And so I started my Facebook page, and I was like, look, this is going to be where I go publicly to either put articles I've published and or articles I think are beneficial. So instead of me replying to, sometimes up to 10 messages a day from different families, like, let's go here. I can't be all that for you, but I can be this.
Yeah.
And right around then is when I was like, oh, I think I need to get sober. I've been in recovery. So like all the things, I'm just like, let's just check all the boxes while we're at
all
it.
at once.
So like, it's all meshed. And I really think parenting has been my way into these advocacy spaces, because you mentioned, or maybe we'll talk about some of the trainings I do, and people are like, how do I talk to my kids about this stuff? It's like, well, really adults and parents want to know these topics better themselves so they can have meaningful conversations, because really the kids aren't the problem. It tends to be the adults who don't know what terms mean, or they don't know their own biases, or this is what they grew up knowing, so they don't know what questions to ask. And so they want to be in these spaces and ask another parent, like, what do I do? What does this mean? How do I support my kid? I think that's what it comes down to in a lot of cases.
And for me, your writing has been so helpful with that, because as much as you are helping people within the LGBTQIA plus community understand how that has to do with parenting, any kind of implications that may have, there are so many cisgender, heterosexual people who do want to know how to have these conversations with their parents and sometimes with your parents and with anybody. And one of the things that we've been talking about or just referring to are pronouns. I think that's kind of the most 101 thing that anyone as an ally can do. I'm not sure if we can see, if people are watching the YouTube, if you can see, I always have like she, her is on my name, just having my pronouns there. You have use pronouns
so smart, and I don't know why I haven't done that.
You want to do it now?
Yes, you can change
like
it.
It's
right
never
now.
even like I see yours all the time, and I never think about what my name says.
I know. Well, yeah, and I don't think
Can
it
you
plays
change
on
them?
our.
I don't know how to do.
Yeah,
I don't think
so
it.
this is actually great. People ask me all the time, so maybe we can keep this in. So
Yes,
we're on Zoom, and if you go to those three little dots in the blue box and hit rename, just next to rename, just add in parentheses. And I always tell folks, add the pronouns you're most comfortable using today. So you don't have to tell me the pronouns that you are most comfortable with all the time, because in different spaces people use different pronouns. A big question that people often ask, I saw somebody at work and they had she/they pronouns, like, what do I do with that? I'm like, that's a great question, thank you for asking. A lot of times I weigh how much can I help with this and how much do I want to say Google's free, because let's not lean on our queer friends too much to give them
Yes.
Right. Like you're not the whisperer of all things. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. But this is coming up more and more often. And I knew where this person was coming from, and they were already using their own pronouns. They're like, man, I totally understand like the benefit of offering my pronouns so that people know how to address me. And also I'm giving them a clue that I'm interested in how they're feel most comfortable being addressed. So that's this nice back and forth. Pronouns are for everybody. They're not just for the transgender community. They're for we all have pronouns. People get so worked up, like, why is this so PC all of a sudden? I'm like, well, how do you identify? Like, we all have pronouns, and there are new to people pronouns that more people are starting to use because language evolves and we are more comfortable expressing ourselves in ways that feel appropriate. We have been using they, them, gender neutral pronouns forever to refer to one person. And often people don't realize they're even doing it. I like to give the example of you go to the park and you see a water bottle and you think, oh my gosh, somebody forgot their water bottle. I hope that they come back and get it. Maybe they won't. I'm going to take it to Lost and Found so that when they come back, they'll know where to find it. So you just kind of do it automatically because you don't know the gender of the person. And it's, first of all, easier instead of saying she, him, like you just don't do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So it is grammatically correct. It's in all the major, writing guides. It's in the dictionary. We've been using this language forever. So when folks say, I can't do this, I'm like, well, you probably already actually do this.
Probably do.
You're just using it maybe in a new to you way. And that's okay. It takes practice, but it's not wrong.
It does take practice. And I tell Missy all the time, like, I can mess up someone's pronouns like nobody's business, but it's practice. But one of the things that I have been reminded in advocacy spaces and in trainings is that if you do mess it up, just say, oh,
just own it.
I meant they, them. Move on. Do you agree with that? Don't put this onus on the person who you've screwed up their pronouns to like accept this big apology. Don't go on and on about why. Just apologize, move on.
Yeah, I think two things, like the making a mistake and not correcting it hangs in the air. The over apologizing and then putting it on the person to make you feel better for your mistake is also no. So yeah, just and go on. And if you feel comfortable with that person later on and want to go and say, hey, thank you for being patient with me, or maybe just be like, it's okay if you're not, I'm, trying, or I'm sorry, but don't expect, and it's okay. Because depending on that person's mood, you may be the 20th person to have done that to them today. And they're just not in the space to be forgiving. But yeah, exactly what you said, just quick correction, move on. And, or if you hear somebody else make a mistake, you can just say, oh, Missy, I think they use they, them pronouns.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Like I love being in spaces where people correct other people for me. And it's just this really simple, gesture. It doesn't have to be a big deal. And so for people who use multiple pronouns, I was saying, in different spaces, people use multiple pronouns for a lot of different reasons. Some could be they're really just comfortable with either pronoun. Halsey is a really public example of being upset when somebody chose not to use they pronouns and was obviously more comfortable referring to her with she, her pronouns and wasn't alternating them. So basically, like if you're writing about somebody or talking about somebody who uses multiple pronouns, do your best to use both of them and don't default to what you're just most comfortable with. So that's kind of like somebody is happy with either one, but let's respect both of them. Other people might be trying on new pronouns. They might be like, I want to see how that feels when I hear that. So I want people to use both. Neither one really maybe bother me, or I'm okay with either one. So they might choose, okay, I actually prefer this one, or both are fine. Some people be like, any and all pronouns, it doesn't matter. And that's okay too. For other folks, depending on how accepting the spaces they are in, if they know at like a work situation, they're going to get misgendered a lot. It's almost an allowance to let people misgender them. They're giving permission in a way that protects them emotionally. It's a bummer, but some people do that. Like, I know they're not going to get my pronouns right. So if I kind of go ahead and say either one is fine, maybe half the time I'll get the one that I really want. Those are just a few examples of why people use multiple pronouns. So when you said, I want to put my pronouns, I don't want anybody to feel like they have to choose a pronoun for today that will last forever. So I say, what are you most comfortable with today? And so somebody who uses multiple pronouns, they might say, it doesn't matter. They might say, oh, this one, or like maybe tomorrow you'll want to pick something else. And that's fine too. But in this space today, I'm going to use she, her, because that's what you asked me to do.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I think it's going to be a continuing, like you said, it's practice, it's learning. more and more in our district, most of the teachers have their pronouns if they're doing a Zoom. Well, now we're not doing the virtual school anymore, but for a long time with the virtual school, our district, when kids came back to school this year, had encouraged all the teachers to use their pronouns. And if the kids want to use their pronouns, use that as well. And it's just become hopefully more and more of a norm. And I love that we went through our little tutorial of how to actually go in and change your name. So now
Which I feel really dumb that I did not know how to change my name. That's been my name forever. Like,
there you go.
I never even thought about changing it.
Zoom is weird because I will put it and tell it to keep it, and the next time I logged in, I have to add it again. So
it does do that.
Well, now I'll watch and I know how to fix it.
yeah, so now you know how to fix it.
Love it.
Exactly. And I will say what helps too, like when I talking about teachers, you know, some teachers are like, oh, I have this on my lanyard. I don't know why. I don't understand it. And so I want teachers to understand that. What does it mean? Because I'm not saying by respecting gender neutral or neo pronouns or, you know, multiple pronouns that we can't validate students with other pronouns. I mean, because a cisgender boy who's like, I'm a boy, use he, him pronouns. Absolutely. Let's validate you for that. My transgender daughter, she wants she, her pronouns. That's very validating for her. So we're not saying raise kids without gender when we are saying let's respect gender neutral pronouns. We're saying let's use inclusive language. Let's stop labeling kids boys and girls. Let's open our minds to all the different ways that we can, you know, say hi to a class instead of saying hi boys and girls. There's hi friends, hi team, hi learners, hi students. My elementary school that my kids go to, I think there's an animal. So hi sloths, like every room is something different. Like there's so many different ways, hi second graders, that we can address these kids without maybe making one or more kid feel isolated because they're like, oh man,
I'm not either one of those things.
Feel that thing, or I'm exploring it. And even it's not just for the trans and queer kids. You know, it helps us break out of these gender stereotypes for the cisgender straight kids, because we want kids to be able to explore all colors and emotions and toys and subjects without feeling like they have to fit into this mold of what it means to be a boy or a girl. And if we do this, I mean, I often say, like, you know, queer folks and drag queens are just allowing like these like cis men to wear nail polish if they want to, because like, let's like normalize the fact that like you can wear and do whatever you want. And that's pretty amazing. So yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to take away, and other people in this space are not trying to take away what people hold true to themselves. We're simply asking for them to be more respectful of other identities. That's really what it comes down to.
100%.
I'm going way off of our plan and we'll get back onto it.
Sure.
My brain is like spiraling.
I do that to people.
I'm trying to figure out how to talk to people in my life who it feels like a scarcity issue. Like what is this fear? And then how do you talk to it? How do you talk about it? Like what can I say to my very cisgendered people who don't want to know? Like, how do I talk to them? Can I talk to them?
Well, I mean, one, I guess it's good. It's not about them, right? I mean, they don't have to make any changes. I mean, nobody's asking them to identify differently. I think what it comes down to, and I think my toxic trait is, I think everything can be solved with social emotional learning. But
I love social emotional learning.
But I really, really think if people could find a way, so I'll rewind a little bit. So somebody, you know, let's say a cisgender male, right? Somebody who the gender they were assigned at birth based on their body parts, their sex, was male, and they identify as male. They're male. This is who I am. If you ask them why, they might start listing traits. Well, I like football. I like this. It's like, well, that's what you like, but what makes you know you're a man? It's kind of hard sometimes for people to like know, because you just kind of know. You have this sense of self, and that's really amazing. We all have that. And so once you start saying, if he says, I'm male, if you then say, well, here's a transgender man who was assigned female at birth, but actually that their gender identity is male, then if he can't see that transgender man, who, depending on what this person's body parts are the same as him, then he starts questioning his own masculinity, and he starts questioning his own sense of identity and sense of self. And that's scary. Like, if this person is a man, but there's so many differences that I don't understand, then how can I also be a man? And so either that person is like, does it matter? Am I comfortable and confident enough in myself and in my relationships to allow this person to live safely and with respect and happiness? Or am I going to dig in and push back because I don't want to understand, because that's scary if I have to learn something new, and if that goes against what my community also supports? So we get into people who are part of certain religious communities, certain friend groups, family circles, politics. And it's really scary to start thinking or learning about things that aren't part of the group. You don't want to be the outsider in a group. And so you get into this tricky position of like, do I really want to dig myself out of these beliefs and start questioning stuff and learning, knowing that I might lose some friends and family? Or do I want to just stay stuck? And I mean, obviously, I don't think people rationally go through all of these thoughts.
Right. Yeah. I'm going to stay stuck. Yeah.
Right. I don't think they do. I think some people do because, they claim their religion tells them to, or, there's a lot of different reasons. I don't think religion has to be separate from queerness. There are plenty of activists in the space who also hold, queerness and religion very closely together. And a lot of Christians will tell you that space can and should be inclusive for all people. But unfortunately, a lot of the anti-trans and anti-queer laws have been based on religion. So I have a very tricky relationship with the topic, but I think that's why people fight against, these new identities. And this is what I learned in third grade science. It's like, well, okay, you're 52 now. Like you can now scroll your newspaper on your phone too. Like you couldn't do that in third grade either. And so it's things
have
change.
evolved. Things have evolved.
Things change. And the fear, it's just fear-based. I mean, that's a oversimplification, but I just see it's a lot of fears, and you can call them different things, but they come down to this.
Yeah.
People being afraid.
And part of getting rid of that, a huge part of it, is education. And a lot of the work that you do in different schools and businesses in terms of trying to make them more inclusive and affirming spaces for LGBTQI plus people. So I know you do speaking on these topics, and then you also lead these workshops on becoming better allies. And then also, it's just so people can understand the idea of being transgender, and how do you talk to your kids about it? How do you talk to other family members about it? And we are running head on into this. Well, I've been doing it for a long time with my Informed Parents of Austin group, trying to make sure that cishet parents are feeling equipped and informed in order to have these conversations and to be better allies. But I think in this past week or two in Texas, it's just been especially in our face. I mean, we've had a lot of laws that we've had to fight against in the past with the bathroom laws. Texas is a big spot for that. Now it's kids being able to play sports in school. But most recently, the most tragic part has been Abbott doing this proclamation saying that basically parents who are allowing their trans kids to identify who they are open for being accused of child abuse, having their kids taken away while these cases are checked out. But basically saying that any type of medical care that is supportive of the trans kids is child abuse. So, I mean, this isn't just a matter of what your preference is anymore. This is a matter of parents losing their kids. I mean, it can't get bigger for me. So allies, great, but I think we need to upgrade things a little bit to accomplice now these days. Like what can we do? What should we be doing now to make sure that these kids aren't getting taken away from their families?
Yeah. So I have a lot obviously to say on this. I'm not a legal expert. There's amazing work being done by the ACLU, Lambda Legal, Equality. Is it Texas?
Equality Texas.
Equality Texas. I wasn't sure if it's Texas Equality or Equality Texas.
Yeah. And the Transgender Education Network of Texas is also amazing.
So I know there's a lot of legal places happening, but the reality is they can't handle all these cases. So I want to back up a little bit. And so, yes, Texas is not the only state, unfortunately. I think there are currently 24 states looking at anti-trans and or LGBTQ laws. And a lot of it has to do with kids can't play on the sport of, with as the gender they identify with, or we can't talk about this stuff in classrooms. And if kids do talk about who they are or come out to I don't know, I'd like to say supportive teacher, they're saying that teachers are supposed to then report this to the parents. And whether the parents are going to be supportive of this or not, I always tell educators and guidance counselors, if a child comes to you with this information, and there's no harm, obviously, if there's like suicide ideation, self-harm, abuse, bullying, like there's different, like we want to make sure these kids are safe. But if a kid comes to you and says, I think I'm gay, or I kind of feel like a girl, like, and comes to you as a trusted source to just talk to, like, one, thank you for telling me. I'm so glad that you trust me with this information. And that's when you say, does anybody else know? Can I talk about this with anybody else? And if a kiddo says, a couple of my friends know, or no, not really, or, Mrs. Smith knows my, social studies teacher, but I really am not ready for my parents to know. That's when the teacher has to reel back. And you can say why. And the kid might just not be ready. Because when we tell our parents things, it's kind of final, because then like the questions are going to come. Is this real? Like, like as a kid, like, oh man, once like my parents find out, do I have to commit to this? Like,
they're going to bring it up every 5 minutes.
Right. Like,
do you still feel like a girl? Do you still feel like a girl?
And so in best case scenario, it's just a nosy, really supportive parent. Right. That's what we all want. We want like people who care about us so much. We want to ask all the questions to get all the answers because we love you. For other situations, the parents are not accepting and the kid knows. And then, so it's going to go from a quietly, or maybe, not so quiet, toxic situation to an abusive situation. So I just had a article out there on parents.com about, we need to stop outing LGBTQIA plus kids because they're, the increase of self-harm, abuse, homelessness, all that stuff goes up. It's just not safe. And they're going to be who they are anyhow. You're just putting them at risk if you decide to either tell community members and or other students or their parents. Some teachers have pushed back and said, well, isn't it a parent's right to know? I'm like, just because you would want to know, like, no, kids are not our kids don't belong to us. Like, there's no right to know anything. Our kids aren't, using my credit card without my knowledge. Like, they're not stealing from me. Like, they're trying to figure out who they are. And I'm so glad that they found somebody that they could talk to about that in a safe way. And hopefully when they feel comfortable, they'll come and talk to me. And so whether I think I've created an environment that's safe enough for them to do that or not, it's their timing, it's their story for when they're ready to come and talk to me about certain things. So what's happening in Texas is definitely the peak of attack, essentially. So yes, what Abbott and Paxton did essentially was saying, anybody who offers gender affirming medical care to trans students could potentially be prosecuted as abusing their children. So what drives me nuts is, the American Medical Association, Endocrine Society, American Academy of Pediatrics, what's the other one? American Psychological, Association has said not treating these kids is what's hurting them, is what's
dangerous.
It's really dangerous. And when people think of trans kids and allowing them to transition, they automatically think, oh, you're operating on these kids. It's like, first of all, can we talk about circumcision? Like, like if we're really gonna talk about performing surgeries on kids without their consent, let's talk about that first.
Yeah.
Like, there's
a widely accepted just thing we just do.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like, let's have conversations about really what's happening. So when it comes to transitioning, if it's okay to talk about this for a second, there's a lot of different ways a human being can transition. And it doesn't have to be medical ever. There's social transitioning, which a lot of younger kids do, which is, I might want to dress a certain way. I want my hair to be a certain way. Could you please call me this name? Those are all social forms of transition. There might be legal ways to do this. Birth certificate change, as a kid gets older, their driver's license, maybe a passport. These are different legal things people can do to change their gender markers. And then there's medical, which is really hard and expensive to acquire. Like, I don't know where Abbott thinks like we're just like pulling like, like hormones and surgeries out of the air, because like I, as a how old am I now? 40, as a 39-year-old who had gender affirming surgery, like my insurance and paperwork, the hoops I had to jump through to finally get this surgery, like we aren't just operating on children. That's not all children want or need that. What we're talking about with transgender use specifically when it comes to medical care, and that can be therapists too, like
I was going to say psychological care. Yes.
To care. And it's not because these kids need, there's anything wrong with them. They're not mentally ill. Sadly, trans people have had to prove the fact that they're so uncomfortable in themselves to get the care that they need instead of just being affirmed. Like, so the therapy comes in because it's like, we have to go through like, I'm miserable. Like, I mean, plenty of trans people are miserable, but like before I could have my surgery, I had to prove my dysphoria, which did exist, but in a medical way in order for insurance to even consider paying for it. I'm like, can't we flip that a little bit and be like, look how happy this human being is, like, and they know their bodies well enough to want to go and do this.
Yes.
So when we talk about trans kids, if a kid before puberty knows that they're not the identity that they were given at birth, for a lot of them, it's really scary to think about puberty progressing their bodies into a gender that they don't identify with. So my transgender daughter, the idea for her, you know, as she gets older, for her voice to deepen, facial hair, like all these different things that would make her look like she's presenting as male is really terrifying. And that's the same with a transgender male. Doesn't want, you know, breasts to grow, periods may or may not happen, but there's a lot of things that, you know, your body changes. Puberty stinks, you know, and add that on top of, you know, a transgender kid who's like, I don't want my body to do this because it aligns with a gender that feels really miserable for me.
Right.
Yes.
Then how do we do it? And we use puberty blockers. And those have been prescribed forever for kids who go through early puberty. Like there are some 6-year-olds who start puberty and doctors are like, okay, that's a little too early, and or they're going to feel like outcasts against their social peers because what 6-year-old girl at the pool wants to be like, hang on, I don't know if I can swim today because I have my period. I'm not comfortable. Like it's just too soon.
I have had that. I started puberty at like 10. It was too early. It was the only one of my friends. I wish that I could have slowed that a bit.
So oftentimes they will. And so because puberty blockers are safe and reversible, they're prescribed. I mean, and so whenever you take that puberty blocker away, body kicks in and goes through the puberty that, you know, it does. I mean, our bodies are pretty amazing that way. So puberty blockers are totally reversible. It pauses time. And so for some folks who are like, well, what if kids change their mind? Well, they might. They don't usually, like detransitioning, like you might hear 1 or 2 cases and you know, it just doesn't.
And of course,
happen
that's all you'll hear about
often,
from any opposition because they'll try to like just.
And I tell, if from the age of 2.5, you know, my daughter to, let's say we do puberty blockers, let's say we, you know, she goes off them, let's say at, I don't know, 12, 13, maybe 14. He's like, actually, I guess I really am a boy. Do not think that's going to happen. Then I'll say, you know what? Then we had 12 really amazing years of you living as exactly who you wanted to be. You're super happy. And okay, we'll support this too. Your body's going to do what it needs to do. Like, that's just what it is. Like, I don't see any problem in that. But for a lot of kids who are, the truth is puberty blockers. And then when they get a little older, then they're going to take cross hormones. And so then, you know, a transgender boy would start taking testosterone, and that would force their body into a puberty that is more aligned with their gender. You know, the voice will lower, the facial hair, you know, some different things happen. And so what's really great about puberty blockers, if a kiddo can take them before puberty, is that it might reduce the chance of them maybe having to have gender affirming surgery when they're a little bit older. So a transgender boy who never develops breasts doesn't have to have them removed someday.
Yes.
Not that transgender men should or need to have their breasts removed, but a lot of them do. And so you're at least giving, you know, or even non-binary people, like you can have any body parts that you want and feel good in. Nobody's saying you have to medically do anything. But when we're talking about youth, and Abbott really thinks that we're somehow like castrating children and or sterilizing them or doing things to them that's going to hurt them in the long run. And it's not. By not doing that, we're increasing their risk of death by suicide so much more. So I rather have a kid on puberty blockers than not a kid at all. And that's really what's at stake. I don't want to sound dire, but the reality of the situation
is dire.
it's dire. Biden did finally step in with, right now I'm calling it strongly worded language. So I'm hoping that it follows through, but apparently I kept calling it Homeland Security, which it kind of feels like Homeland Security, but it's still Human Services.
Security of your home. Yeah.
I know. Right. Has said the job of these social services, which are already overrun, right? Like the last thing they want is a parent being reported for loving and affirming their kid. They don't have time for that. They're saying, these agencies, remember, your job is to protect these kids, and that includes providing gender affirming care. They're reminding doctors that, HIPAA, you have to maintain the patient's privacy. And if you feel nervous or like that you as a provider are under legal consideration because somebody thinks you did something wrong, here are services that we can provide you with. They've also offered services to families who are currently under investigation. Right now, everything is halted. So we'll see what happens. This is not the end of the fight. It's going to keep going. I appreciated Biden's words. I hope it's enough of a threat and or enough weight to stop what's happening. Right. I don't know if I should be optimistic or not, but I hope that gives some people some safe spaces to go to if they need it, and or a little peace of mind knowing that at least they have some federal protection. Because like I mentioned before, the ACLU, these other, grassroots, not the ACLU is grassroots, but local organizations trying to help these families, they're taxed because at a certain point, they weren't set up to do this kind of work, and the volume of it and across all these states. It's just too much. We need the federal government to step in and say enough is enough.
Yeah. And in addition to those local resources being taxed, parents of trans kids are exhausted. I mean, I see it in Texas, but I'm sure it's across the nation, across the world. And one of the things that we try to do in my group Informed Parents of Austin is really get people to almost be a relief pitcher. Like if you're going to go to the Capitol or if you're going to go to a school board meeting, a lot of times people don't feel safe. Their kid may not be completely out. Even if they are, they don't feel safe putting a spotlight on them. Ask them, be this megaphone for them if they need you to read their words at a school board meeting, or literally go hold a sign. For a good portion of summer, they were just standing outside of the chambers where the Senate was, so that when they would come out of meetings, we'd be holding our Protect Trans Kids signs. You don't need to say anything. You don't need to be on the news. You don't need to be able to, speak to every point as eloquently as Amber has, but hold a sign. And those parents that are there every dang day doing that, give them a break. I mean, just because someone's in the LGBTQ plus community does not mean that they are an activist and that they have tons of spare time to be protesting at the Capitol. So I try to encourage other cishet parents to know that it can be hard sometimes when you're trying to support a community that you're not a member of, because you feel like either you're trying to go in, whether it be racial and you're the white savior, or in this case, the straight savior of going in. Right. But there's so much need for it, and there's so much relief needed for these parents. So, I mean, what can we do? Even some of my friends have just been just calling the parents of trans kids and just saying hi, checking in on them. That's the number one thing they need right now, is just a little bit of emotional comfort and relief. Are there any things that you can think of too that we should be doing?
Yeah, I think, like you said, and sometimes people say well, just, for these families with trans kids or trans people themselves, just leave the space. Well, that's not an option. That's quite a privilege. One, you're just going to be where can you go? First of all, this is your home. And so the fact that there are organizations there who are doing this, we do need allies, and we do need people speaking up. And somebody said to me the other day, how do we get here? I'm well, because we have always known where people like Abbott and Paxton stand. I don't know who my allies are. So I need people who are against this to speak up about it. I need them to, yes, it's nice to see on Facebook, I support you, or calling them, but it's showing up at school board meetings. It's, why are we banning these books again? Hey, why don't calling your local library and say, do you have these books? If not, can I buy them for you? Do you have the budget to buy these books so that the queer community can see themselves represented in your spaces? Hey, workplace, can we have a training on some of this stuff? Hey, teacher at my school, have you all been educated on inclusivity and spaces? What have you done? is there a local place you can donate money to help them keep doing the things? It's a lot of showing up. And you're right. These parents are exhausted. And, I've been in this space for a long time. And I sometimes forget that not all trans people understand what's happening in the legal world because they're just living their lives as they should. I'm like, oh, right. Yes. I was working as a writer and I'm like, and they're like, wait, what's happening in Texas? I'm like, how do you not know? I'm like,
I'm just trying to live my life.
You're just trying to do stuff as you should.
You mean you're not all day long in the scroll hole?
I know. Well, I mean, and as the news editor at Parents, I am constantly looking at the news. So it's not only all the news, but as an activist in these spaces, it's just constant. And so, yes, I do. I'm tired too, but I also, and it shouldn't feel like a benefit. I know I'm in a safe place. I know that my kid is protected. I know where I will never move to, but for the parents who are there, yeah, I think the allies showing up, being loud, and for those parents, the Trevor Project is a great resource. GLAAD, PFLAG, and also, I don't know if you are all familiar with Genderpool, but they're this super organization. And so much of trans lives, unfortunately, have to be seen through this trauma lens, of look what's happening to us. We're being attacked. We have to prove our existence. Look, we're not horrible. Genderpool has totally flipped it on its head. And there's 14 champions, and they're just trans youth living their best lives. And it's showcasing these amazing trans kids, just who they are. A lot of them are also activists. One of them, at least one of them, lives in Texas. And I know his mom does a ton of work politically down there too. And so I want parents to see that trans kids are amazing, and all parents, but I want parents of trans kids to be like, oh my gosh, look, they're thriving. I'm doing the right thing by affirming, not that I think they would tell you otherwise, but it's like, oh, look, I don't want to just see the suicide stats, right? I mean, yes, that's a reality, unfortunately. And too many parents know what that feels like. But I also want parents and trans kids to see the joy and beauty of who we are. And Genderpool does that. And I love them. They're a great organization. So if you have the chance to check them out and or link to it,
we'll link to it for sure.
It's really fun and affirming to see all that stuff. So yeah, I think just pressing your family, your friends, if you feel like, hey, I just learned this really cool thing about pronouns. Can I tell you about it? I think it's just what we want to do is move those passive allies to be more active, because we're never going to move the, family member at the dinner table who's like, oh, okay. I hope that we can get there. The goal really is to move those people in the middle to become more active, to donate a little money, to show up, to learn something new so that they can teach something, because I'm hoping that my knowledge today here spreads out a little bit, and that it goes beyond you too, and that you can go and educate a couple of people, and whoever listens can educate a couple of people. So if we can keep doing that and become louder about it, my hope is that we can do better and be better for trans youth, and just people in general. I mean, sometimes, it bums me out that people are like, until it happens to them, it's like, do you
not valid.
know somebody that you love and care about before you do this? Can't we just think about humanity? And
yes,
it's the right thing.
That's what blows my mind. And I know I'm oversimplifying, but it is it's not about you. That's what I want to scream so often, is it's not about you, but it's about us. Why can't we just make it okay for everybody?
Well, and I like to tell people that we all have the same thing. We all have the sense of gender, the sense of self. We all have gender expression. How do we show up today? What are we wearing? How was our hair? Do we do makeup? Do we do jewelry? And then, how do we fall in love? Is it, physically? Is it emotionally? How do we, we all are human beings. We have these things. What I hope to do is through representation and through education, showing that the things that deviate from those gender stereotypes and the heteronormative idea that everybody is male or female and everybody marries, into a cisgender relationship, heterosexual one. I don't want people to think anything that's not that is wrong. We have to learn that there's more out there. There's always been more out there, because we all have these things, and no one thing should be set as the default. But unfortunately, we're still working as if the heteronormative is the end all be all, and it's just not.
So much so. And, we have totally blown through our look, listen, learn time, but I am so glad because I
Oh,
think all this information is so important. But before we do let you go, I want to do my soapbox. I do this every once in a while, but in defense of comprehensive LGBTQ inclusive sex ed,
mhm.
so incredibly important. And I just before anybody starts to freak out about, oh, but sex ed, well, we have so over sexualized sex ed and what's actually included in it. I mean, it is all just about respecting who we are and respecting others, whatever part of their life that may show up in. And
We want
we also,
all genders to understand how the menstrual cycle works. Can we just
yes.
start there?
Oh,
Right.
yes. Yes.
Like that's inclusive sex ed.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had a really conversation about it at the table the other night. Seems like an odd place to discuss the menstrual cycle,
Yeah.
but I am the only female identifying person in my house. I am the only person who has had or will have a menstrual cycle in this house. And
Well, you don't have to
a
be female
random-
identifying to have that. So you're
That
the
is
only
yes.
person with a uterus who bleeds.
Yes.
right. Or had a uterus. who
Oh,
bled.
okay.
I don't do that
There
anymore.
you go. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
there's
I don't do that. But we had to talk about it. A question came up in a jokey manner, and that it allowed for well, this is how it works, and that it's what it's like, and it was not a big deal. And I thought, okay, I have effed up so many things in my life, and I'm
Yeah.
sure my kids will have a lot of reasons to be on the therapist's couch. But the fact that we can sit at the table working on our service project and have a discussion, and my 15, almost 16-year-old boy didn't run away or cover his ears or,
Yeah.
we just had a talk, and his dad was there, and we were just like, this
And
is what
a
it
little
is.
a little PSA also to call them period products instead of feminine hygiene products, because
Ooh.
we have engendered a lot of terminology that we use around things that
Mhm.
aren't necessarily specific to one gender. So that's one thing
Yeah.
I'd like to say. But I want to do a little shout out also for social emotional learning. Everybody needs to be aware that this is the next thing that they, as in they who burn books and that who fight a lot of these policies, are coming after. And we have seen it. I think that Texas is one of the front rows for seeing what ugliness is coming around the corner. They are coming after social emotional learning. Know that term. Know that it is not scary. Know that it's just letting kids know who they are and loving that about themselves and loving who other people are the way they are. And they're trying to make that scary. And they're
I
trying.
think about how different and better my life could have been in the lives of so many people I'd known had we had the language to talk about what we felt or what we were seeing. And there was no language. I was a very grown woman before a therapist helped me put language to some of my feelings and to some of what I was struggling with.
Mhm.
And it wasn't because my parents didn't want me to have that. It just was different then.
Yeah.
It was just, we didn't talk about it. So the gift that these kids have, and now we're going to try to snatch it away because someone has put a negative connotation
Yeah.
to this.
It has
concept.
nothing to do with quote unquote indoctrination into the LGBTQI plus lifestyle. It has nothing to do, I mean, it has to do with your identity as far as who you are and who you feel you are and what you love about yourself. But it is
And how you relate
just-
to others.
Yeah.
Being able to
well,
be a
and you
community
see
member.
kids they can't sit still. They're angry. They're throwing things. Well, maybe they're hungry and their parents are fighting a lot.
Mhm.
How can we talk to kids about what's going on inside that's causing them to have these reactions? I mean, yes, consequences, and yes, set boundaries and limitations. Of course, you have to protect all students in this space, but perhaps there's something else going on besides this kid, being labeled a bad kid or a hard kid or a difficult kid or something else. Can we give educators the time and space and resources to be hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
And some language
yeah.
around it.
Give
Know
kids the
what to
tools to say, I don't know, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I need to go for a walk.
Yeah.
Because that's really
Mhm.
important too.
Yeah, this literally just came up in our shack meeting though, because we just approved the new textbooks, the first new health textbooks in Texas in over 20 years.
Oh, all
They
right.
still do not acknowledge the fact that there are LGBTQIA plus students, but they do touch on a lot of the social emotional learning things, which as a byproduct are helping kids, even if, I mean, I do think it needs to be explicit and said in the words, it is not. But even if it is not, it is still giving a little wink. I can't wink. Give it. There we go.
Wow.
Fist
Something in your
raiser.
eye.
There we go. giving a wink to like, hey, yeah, kid, we got you. But people are now freaking out to the fact that it's encouraging kids to find a trusted adult. And that is the ammunition that people are going to use against social emotional learning. The fact that the parent does not necessarily have to be numero uno person that kids are going
just such a narrow way of thinking.
Things. It is, and it's dangerous, but I just want people to be aware of this as they start hearing things come out and be like, oh, I'm not sure about these lessons. They're sending people to, the neighbors instead of talking to their parents. Like, no. They're teaching them what a trusted adult is. So they're not just searching for stuff on the internet. They're not going to adults that could be dangerous. They are helping them make smart decisions of other places where they can do research that doesn't necessarily involve getting their parents involved. So no one is trying to bypass parents.
Right. Like I like to think that my kids could come to me, that we are trusted, safe adults, but everybody is an individual. And there may be a time that my kids, for some reason, cannot come to me or their father about it. We have taught them since they could hear who their other trusted adults are, how to find another trusted adult, how to look around and figure out who that might be for them. And we practice. I say, if you're not feeling great about something and you don't want to talk to me, who are you going to talk to? Who? And, you don't even have to tell me, just in your head, do you know who that person is? And do you know how to reach them?
Yeah. And just know that you should. It's okay.
Yes, you've got to talk to somebody. That's what we always say. You have to talk to somebody.
Yeah, talk to somebody. It doesn't have to be me, but find someone if something's too much for you to be carrying around.
Yeah. I want it to be me, of course, because I'm a nosy and caring mother. But it doesn't have to be me.
And then have that person report back to me what you said.
And you make it somebody who's going to tell me. No.
Oh my gosh. We haven't even got to your awesome new job. Congratulations, by the way, on your new job at parents.com. Can you tell us how things are going? And maybe we'll highlight in the show notes some of top articles that we want to make sure that people are reading.
Yeah. Send us some things you'd like us to link to.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. So I have gone from writer freelancer for a long time to editor, which it's hard to turn off that hustle, kind of grinding. I mean, I'm still doing a lot of work, but it's like reverse freelancing, because now I have all these story ideas and I have to find writers for them versus like finding editors to publish them. But it's great. So I'm a news and trends editor at Parents, and it is great. I love the team, and I've worked with these folks through being a writer and just different writing circles for a long time. And I really like being in the position I'm in because I get to shape news in a way that is news for parents in all corners of the country and the world, and not just, a particular brand of parent. I want all parents to feel seen. My goal is to get as many diverse writers to tell a diversity of stories, because being able to tell a story about being a trans person in America really needs to come from a trans person in America. That, you could maybe report on something because you can read and you're smart and you can put words together, but to be able to tell something through the lens of that same identity is just different. So I feel really great and supported in my role to be able to find people to those stories and to hopefully share information with parents that maybe they don't know what they don't know yet. I had a piece about why LGBTQIA plus books are being banned right now and how these school boards are becoming political playgrounds. And it's really just a way in to affect curriculum. And, have a piece about stop outing queer kids. And I just want parents to know what's going on if it's outside of their world. And there's going to be some pushback because it might not apply for them, might not agree for it. But I want to make sure, whether it's, families with disabilities, different race, different communities, different cultures, different socioeconomic backgrounds, that we can hopefully tell stories in a way that all parents somehow see themselves eventually in the information we're giving them. So I love it. It's a lot. It's a very fast paced kind of, it's hard to kind of keep up with, what's trending and entertainment stuff. How do you keep up with what's trending, but also what do you keep up with what you think is really important, everybody should know? And they're like, yeah, well, it's like, well, it is, come on, it's really important. And not that I get the meh from my team, but it's, as you know, audiences,
you never know what they're going to grab onto.
You never know fickle. But I feel really good in that role, and things are good.
So we're excited for you.
Thank you.
And I'm glad that you're kind of being the megaphone for a lot of those voices and giving them a platform to be able to share those stories. So I think that's wonderful.
It feels good. Yeah.
Oh,
And I love being able to
good.
do stuff like this still too. That was a really important piece of like, make sure I can still do trainings. I can still do these kind of things. So I love that I can still do the advocacy stuff because I can't not. It's just part
It
of
is
who
part
I
of
am.
who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we need it so much. And in the Austin area, and actually, I mean, there's GLSEN trainings that go on nationwide throughout schools as well. Out Youth has a really great program in Austin now. So, I mean, it is happening, but it's not going to happen unless y'all go out there and speak up at the school boards, because there's like a 5% group that is the 95% of the voice that people
Yep.
are hearing, because they've got
Yep.
the time and the money and
Yep. Oh yeah.
to get out there and speak. So, I mean, if you are a silent supporter, now's the time to speak up.
Yeah. Well, and if people aren't familiar with what's happening in Texas, the podcast South Lake will clue you right on in of, have you heard or listened to?
I have not
I've heard of it, but I haven't listened yet.
So
Okay.
it's that little town South Lake, and it's basically how they want, I mean, it became the fight of like CRT, and it's not critical race theory. Basically, like they wanted, the school's going to pass an equity policy.
Mhm.
And it then turned into, there's not a racism problem here. And it became a political game. And it became, like you said, the very loud 5% organizing and getting money and stopping the equity policy because the fear of, LGBTQIA plus and race theory.
Yeah.
And
And
it
y'all,
was-
there is such strategy behind this. I mean, they will, depending on what their cause of the month is, it's the same people. They will bust them into the Capitol. They will take them to all the different school boards.
they're very organized.
They are so organized, and it is just, it's like almost like a corporate structured
Yep.
plan. It is
Mhm.
not
We need to get
grassroots.
just as organized. Like, I just feel like we're not.
There's so many different ways
matching
we're
them.
trying to attack this one big thing. And I think that's part of it, right? And it's not that all these smaller pieces aren't good, but there's so many different ways to attack this. And they're just like, we're all in. Like
Yes.
we don't like any of these things that you're all trying to do. And, like we have all these pockets of trying to fight for individual rights or individual groups. And, we do need to have more intersection in our, from feminism to, anti-racism to, and like, we need to find a way to incorporate that more often, but we also need, like I said, and you said, the quiet allies to be louder and to show up and
Yeah.
to,
Mhm.
publicly say, I'm an ally, do you want some education here?
And I mean, even for the allies who are baby stepping it, for the people who are at the Capitol, at the school board for 5-6 hours, days on end,
Yeah.
bring snacks, bring
Yeah.
signs, ask if you can run some errands. Literally, I mean, if maybe you can provide childcare for some of the people who are there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's things that you can do even if you are a timid ally, or a lot of people, I deal with an anxiety disorder. After a certain amount of time of being up front, being interviewed, whatever the case may be, I do have to back off a little bit.
Mhm.
And so there may be some weeks where, I'm the social media share, or I'm the food deliverer, or whatever the case may be. There's other ways to help support. So
Yeah.
find the way that works for you. And then I would encourage you to then try to take it just a little bit further, just a little
For
bit
sure.
further. But yes, oh my gosh, we've kept you way beyond your time. And I know
Yes,
that
we have.
you have a legit job you need to get back to. Missy and I are just like, we just got hungry kids downstairs. Like the parents.com is probably looking.
I don't
where
even
you
have
are.
kids here today. Mine are in school. We don't have the weird day off.
Mine have the
So-
day off. I don't know where
Oh.
they're at, but yes.
Well, thank you. I really
Oh,
appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate
Yeah.
your wisdom and your voice on this. We're trying to make sure that the parents do know what they don't know, and they don't have an excuse anymore. So
Right.
this is great.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye.
Have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much for joining us for the Mom and podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show today. And if you know someone else who could benefit from today's episode, be sure to share it with them. Also, please subscribe and rate us wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find links to all the things we discussed today in the show notes over at our website, momandpodcast.com, with the AND spelled out. In between shows, you can find us at the socials, including our private Mom and Community Facebook group. You can find links to the group, all of our socials and our questions and comments section over at our website, momandpodcast.com. Thank you so much for your support. We appreciate you so much. Now go out there and make your ellipses count.